Hello, I am Ed Hellman, and I am a non-binary trans person, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, I'm really excited to have Ed Hellman joining us. So Ed, welcome to the podcast. It's great having you here.
It's exciting for me too.
Yeah. So a little bit about Ed. They are an award-winning filmmaker and music video director. They are co-founder of the video production company Punch Card Films, a 100% queer-owned certified LGBT business enterprise that turns consumer data into short-form entertainment. I'm super excited about that. So we're going to learn more about what that means. Their recent project for Thinc Design and ESRT is on permanent exhibition in the Empire State Building. Ed's music videos have premiered on Vevo, The Fader, Blackbook Media, and Impose Magazine, and their credit as a producer, director, and first AD include TV and web commercials, music videos, digital content, tech and corporate videos, short films, and feature-length TV movies. So the bio can go on, and it's really, really interesting. I feel like there's so much that I read in that where I'm like, I don't know what this means. So if I mispronounce anything, Ed, let's just jump into it. But I think the first question is, how did you arrive at co-owning this 100% queer-owned business? Like, were you always an entrepreneur, or did you start out and work for other people and slowly figure out, hey, there's something here and I have a business idea and I want to pursue it?
Yeah, well, I was freelancing for a long time, since 2006, really. And I moved to New York for college in 2002, but then I stayed here, and I started out working in prop houses and would work on soap operas and stuff like that with props. And that was fun, but kind of draining. And I ended up kind of leaving the film industry for a little while and working in the hotel industry, and like a really easy job that I thought would allow me to do creative work on the side. And it was a super draining experience because of how hotels are run. And we ended up basically unionizing that position. I was involved in this huge arbitration case that I kind of spearheaded because our position was supposed to be union and it wasn't, according to the hotel. And so we had this huge case, and I kind of stayed for 6 years fighting that case until we won. And at that point, I left and went to grad school and kind of went back to film. But that sort of pushed me in the direction of really paying attention to how people are treated in the workplace. The reason that unionization was super important in that industry, in the hotel industry, was because they really used people's backgrounds and ethnicities and languages to really keep the workers separate. And so when I went more wholeheartely into the film industry and kind of went back into it, I started noticing all the sort of issues in the film industry and how it's very centered on, it's very kind of like militaristic and focused on gender, and, men rise to the top really quickly. And you see women are in the same roles on set frequently. They're like the makeup artist or they're the art director or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's much less common for there to be, for them to be in higher up positions in certain cases. I mean, certainly there are a lot, but there was a obvious gap sort of in who was getting these jobs. So after freelancing for a while, and this is a long answer, I guess, but after freelancing for a while, I found that I wanted to sort of take more control over the kind of projects that I was in. And I was working with enough people that we were able to sort of use our group experience to approach clients together. And then I started this business with my friend Katie Staub, who had just kind of naturally the same viewpoints about the industry. And she is an out lesbian and someone that I had met in grad school. And she just echoed a lot of how I was feeling from my past jobs. And then we just kind of knew that working together would be stronger and help make a bigger difference than individually.
Yeah, yeah. What a journey. I was just kind of like jotting down notes, but just kind of like going into like moving to New York 2002 for college, working in prop houses. That must have been pretty cool just to be exposed to all the soap operas, I guess, and all that fun stuff. But then, your venture into the hotel industry and kind of seeing how I would imagine workers from different countries speaking different language were intentionally separated from the work you were doing, potentially unionizing, and the benefits that could bring, and probably the frustrations that you saw, where it's just like you can kind of see kind of dominant culture identity. I'm just thinking like white guys rising to the top, and it sounds like that kind of carried into the work that you were doing, going back into film, right? And seeing that. So to kind of send out a signal and, have that resonate with Katie, where you both are like, okay, we can do this a little bit different. Talk to me about that. Like, what in your business that you have now, what is it? And what are some of the problems that you're solving, whether it's just related to representation on film and, certainly not seeing enough non-binary or trans people, BIPOC folks, people of different abilities, right? I mean, the list can go on and on. So anyway, talk to me about punch cards and how you're working to fill that gap.
Yeah, it's kind of an ongoing process, and it sort of started out just more casual because we just sort of gravitated to, hiring casts that were more diverse. And then just we became friends with certain people on set, and then we would hire them again. And it was just like kind of a natural process that there tended to be more female identifying people on set in a lot of cases. And then there was a lot of, we kind of had, we had several talks, I guess, Katie and I, and it just became clear that I think we wanted to make it more of a core mission of the company, that we keep that in mind when we're both taking on projects and then when we're casting and hiring for projects. And it's not something that we do, it's not that we only hire those people, but we really keep it in mind and try to make it a priority in certain cases without, it's also very based on, we hire people that are really good, and like, it's great to see someone that's good and then want to support them and want to bring them on for something else. And, if someone is a good production assistant, we'll bring them on as a production manager the next time, and try to give them more like a bigger position, because we want to help their careers. Just because that happened really early on for me was I met some people in the film industry that just kind of said, like, just be nice, like the secret is just being nice to people. And that was like this amazing experience at first. And then after that, like, there were so many jerks, like after that. And I was like, oh my God, those people were really nice. Like, what was the deal with that? Like, what are they drinking? But it's true. It's just like better things happen, and the jobs go better. And it's hard for me as an anxious person. A lot of my work has been as a first AD, which is basically like the timekeeper on set who does scheduling, who's in charge of safety in some capacities, who's really like the bad guy in a lot of ways, like saying like, we don't have time for that, to the director, to, all sorts of things like, that's not safe. We can't do that. We got to move on. And it's been a real process for me to both like be comfortable being aggressive in certain ways, and also like knowing, like being able to be like, all right, you can chill. Like, we just got to be nice, got to like keep it going. And I think that's like, it's something that I kind of struggle with and I want to continue to get better at. But film is kind of like this high pressure situation lots of the times. And so kind of keeping that in the back of my head, like, we can kind of do better and be nicer to people and keep extending these opportunities, helps set a tone that I think is important for everyone, I guess.
Yeah. It goes back to what you were saying initially, that kind of the film industry operates almost paramilitaristic, right? Like, you've got all of these different roles, and I'm just kind of like writing down. So I noticed in your bio you had first AD. I think that means assistant director. Is that right? Or is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of, back in my days working in government, on the Hill, you've got LDs and, there's lots of different terminology. So I just want to make sure that our audience is following along. And also there's this thing of just being nice in an industry that seems like very transactional in some ways. So I guess like thinking about that in the context of what you do. So for your business, are you mostly like helping to find talent to fill roles, or is it much more than that? Just kind of zooming out a little bit so the audience understands what you're up to.
I mean, our job, our company is just a full service production company. So,
Okay.
We'll create all sorts of digital content and broadcast TV commercials and music videos and stuff like that, some short films and stuff like that for clients. And so it's more that when we get those jobs, we try to extend career opportunities to people.
Yeah, no, that's helpful because going on to your website, you have a really lovely equity and inclusion statement that basically just reinforces what you shared, where you're thinking about, there's roles or there's opportunities behind the camera that are available, and thinking about like the diverse talent that is just in New York City alone, and I'm sure throughout your networks, right? And just being considered, being a part of that Rolodex and being top of mind. I'm sure you're shaking that up in lots of ways. Do you see your impact? Like, have you seen some of the referrals that you've given or the work that you've done specifically help start changing the minds of other folks that are in film that may traditionally gravitate to the white, straight, cis guys again and again and again? Like, how are you shaking things up in that way? And I know that's a big question.
No, it's a good question, but I think that it's almost more that like other people have done that for us, so that it's easier for me to see, like, I can look at other filmmakers and say, I can see that they do that in certain capacities and they keep that in mind a lot. And that kind of inspired us in some ways. So, I would hope that in some capacity or at some point, we make a difference with other companies. I'm sure we do in some way, but, I don't see it firsthand. It's more that I feel inspired by other people, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, what's it like for you just to kind of introduce that conversation to people that are moving a mile a minute of like, yeah, just kind of like get this thing done or help us find like really great talent, when you're just kind of like, you're embracing that spirit of just being nice and you're like, time out, like, let's think about some of the talent that could help fill this need. What's that like, navigating those kind of conversations?
Well, it's funny because I think that it's more like Katie does that with me a lot, like,
Yeah.
So I'll be super like, all right, we gotta go, we gotta like do this. And she's like that voice of like, chill, like we're good, like drink some water. Like, I think she's really good at that. And I see that she gets better at it each time we work with different crews. And so for me, that's like this like guiding light and this really good source of comfort, and when I work with her, when she's directing, I can see, I try to do the same thing for her and I try to have those same moments, but it's a process. Film is like a very fast-paced job, and it's, you're like burning money every second, it feels like. And, I've taken less AD jobs in the past couple of years because it's hard to do it in a way that you can kind of keep that stuff in mind. It's very easy to kind of get pretty salty, because you're making decisions that are for the best of people. And, sometimes there isn't the time to explain it sometimes, or it feels that way. And I think that's something that I still need to work on to get better at it. I think it's something that it's always harder in the moment, but keep working at that.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of partnerships, right? It's really nice having, a business partner like Katie who can really round out and play off of your own strengths in terms of bringing what may be invisible to be visible and saying, hey, let's make space. There's some time where we can think about how we're casting and how we can, bring in more BIPOC talent or LGBT talent or whatever that looks like. And what you were saying is like, you're going kind of a mile a minute. So it's finding that balance.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I think that she really excels at, and I've learned a lot from.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that just kind of came up for me is that, so we did a Trans Day of Visibility event for the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce in March of this year, 2021. And so I'm just thinking about film in general, well, entertainment, in and out from soap operas in 2002 up until the work that you're doing today. And, with like films like Laverne Cox's Disclosure, bringing to light more of the experiences that trans and non-binary people have had in consuming film over the last few decades. Like, what's this moment like for you now where we're starting to see more non-binary, more trans actors, people coming forward and super talented people that are also playing roles that are designed for cisgender people? Like, it's totally, well, anyway, I have lots of things to say on it, but I'm fascinated. You've been in the industry for a while. So what is it like to be in this moment now?
Well, I would be curious to hear your thoughts. I think it's great. It's kind of scary at the same time. It's emotional. It's scary in just that, like, I think to be visible is both like empowering and great. And then also, like, you're visible. Like, that's scary in some way. I think both are okay, like both are important, but every time I see, an actor come out as non-binary or something like that, it means a lot. It's strange how much it means, like I feel it in this really deep way. I never kind of know exactly what to do with that feeling, but it's sort of, I think it's like a feeling that I was missing throughout most of my life, and I didn't know I was missing it.
Yeah.
Like to hear that, Biden talking about putting non-binary on passports and stuff like that. It's like really exciting to think that the government is validating this thing that I still struggle even explaining to people. I was just thinking about it this weekend. I was like, I had to talk to someone about being non-binary, and it's impossible. Every single time I just feel like, oh man, I'm going to seem crazy to them, and it's still my experience. It's still, validated by a lot of other people. And, I just have that truth, but it's powerful to see people that I look up to, or people that maybe I don't look up to, but are in power, validate it in some way.
100%. I was just writing down, the exhaustion of explaining yourself again and again when the core of yourself is you just are, right? Like, exactly who you are, and to try to kind of reject the boxes that like, I can speak for myself, like that I often get pushed into. It's like, wait, hang on a second. There's more to the story here. But it's kind of, people have to earn the right to hear your story, in order for you to kind of put in that emotional labor of explaining it.
I like that.
Oh,
phrase.
Thanks. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, I resonated with what you were saying. And it's hard sometimes because you have to have trust in the person or people that you're speaking to, that when you're sharing what is so precious to you, that they're going to receive it with care and be like, thank you for sharing your story, not like something I can read online of what the definition of non-binary is, but what that means to you, Ed. I think that's really important. But also this piece, like you were saying, like that visibility, it's thinking about this moment that we're in where it's not just visibility, it's almost hyper visibility. Like, hey, we exist, but then, what we're seeing, at least legislatively in the United States, is the backlash, at state legislatures, I think the majority of which are not just targeting us as communities, but young trans and non-binary kids, like just figuring out who they are, like knowing their core. And, in this moment, having the language to be like, that's me. I just think of, the 80s, like being a kid in the 80s, like that wasn't really accessible. What I saw was like what was on Phil Donahue, where I was like, oh my God, like something that, like, watching that resonated, but at the same time, it was just done in such a shaming kind of way. And it's very different. There's positive sources where we can see our stories in a way that reflects back to us some kind of hope. And I feel like film plays such a powerful role. And I guess like thinking about what's happening across the country legislatively for trans and non-binary kids, like what might be a hope that you have for the industry, like film or entertainment more broadly, of messages that, you know, leaders in your industry could be sending out to young people right now? I know that, again, that's a big question, but if we could just dream.
No. Yeah, it's a good question. I had like 6 thoughts while you were talking because what you were saying was so interesting. I don't know. It made me just think about the kind of stories that are written, and that it would be great to see like less gendered characters, you know, or characters with more diverse kinds of gender shown. I always get really excited when I see, you know, a non-binary character or something like that that is in there, but it isn't a big deal.
Yeah.
I remember growing up, you know, I'm bisexual or pansexual. I still kind of like am trying out the different terminology, you know. I remember, you know, being attracted to guys like in kindergarten, but I was also attracted to girls. So I just kind of was like, all right, so I'm straight. Like I didn't even understand. I mean, this was the 80s too, but like through some of my teenage years, I just didn't even put together, like there's like this weird gap in my mind, you know? So it made a big difference when I would see characters in books. Even like, he's very controversial, but like Bret Easton Ellis is a dick in a lot of ways, but I really like the way that he writes in certain, like his prose, I think can be very masterful. His books really impacted me as a kid. And I remember thinking like, he would just have characters sleep with men and women, and it just wasn't like a talking point, you know, like it just wasn't it wasn't like like a big deal. And that was, or Patricia Highsmith also, who's, you know, was also kind of like a interesting person, but is an awesome author. Her, you know, her characters, you know, like for A Price of Salt, which was Kim Carroll, the movie, like there's just something really interesting when these things can be normalized. Long answer.
Yeah. No, but it totally makes sense. And I was just thinking before you said that last bit, you know, it's the normalization of gender expansiveness and, you know, the freedom of, you know, fluidity. You know, I'm just thinking about what you're talking about, your relationship to your gender, separate from your relationship to your sexual orientation. And there's fluidity in both, right? Like it's not necessarily this dualistic world where you're either a 0 or a 1, you know, like there's and it's exciting because I think for younger people, because there's more language, there's more sophisticated ways that we talk about this, younger people have a little more freedom of the journey of identity development that happens for every young person, right? And that your gender identity and your sexual orientation is also an identity development. There's identity development components to it. And it's just known.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you know, like between 2 and 3, like kids know a certain truth about who they are, and their gender is a big component to that. Now, what society does to that, you know, the policing, that's a whole other thing. You know, that's another podcast. You know, I do think like, you know, the roles that we play as business leaders, you know, and what you're doing, you know, where you're 100% queer-owned company, you know, that's a possibility for lots of people, you know, not just young people, but lots of people trying to figure out, is entrepreneurship for me? And so I guess like, you know, what kind of freedoms has it brought? You know, I mean, yes, like being a freelancer has always been a part of your work background, but running your own business, like what kind of freedom does that have where you can show up and bring more of yourself into the work that you're doing?
You know, Katie and I kind of got to a point as freelancers where we finally started turning down jobs. You know, for many years, we were just like taking anything. In the film business, you know, most of that was the kind of jobs we wanted, but then some of them would be like driving a truck or something like that, you know, and other times it would be working with people that we didn't necessarily vibe with, or on a project that, you know, we felt a little uneasy about. And I think being a business owner gave us both the ability to kind of dictate what we want to take on, and also there's this conversation that we have where, you know, we both have our own goals as filmmakers. And in some ways, our styles are similar in certain ways, but they're also very different in other ways. And then we have punch card film style, which is like this little mix of it. And we're very specific about what we want to take on for that and what the tone and viewpoint is that we want to kind of show with those projects. So I think that being a business owner has allowed us to sort of craft that. And that's been a really positive experience that I didn't even expect. I just kind of didn't even think of that as a thing, but the business becomes this living entity that you're feeding and taking care of. And it's suddenly not just about you. And that makes it, I think it's like, for people that become parents, it sounds like, like suddenly it's bigger than you and it helps you be more responsible and all that jazz, I guess.
I like that analogy. And it does feel that way, right? I mean, you take an idea, right? An idea, and you put like a plan around it, you start executing it. And I like what you said, sometimes like if you have a baby, sometimes that baby does become bigger than you are, but certainly, your business does. And so like with Punch Card itself, like the business that you're taking on your website, it's, taking consumer data and kind of turning that into entertainment. And so what does that mean for people like me? I'm like, this is fascinating. And I want to entertain people with consumer data, but I have no idea how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really that we take interest in really learning what has worked for a business, who their audience is, and who they are sort of at their core. And, as LGBTQIA plus people, that's something that we're mindful of and we're paying attention to, especially, I think, within ourselves. So we take as much information we can about the company and then try to be true to it, basically.
And then you're taking that information and you're turning it into like video for the company, or like what do you do with the?
Yeah. I mean, it's really that, clients will come to us with, we need a video talking about corporate culture, that we're going to use for our investors, or we're going to use for recruitment or something like that. Or this is a new product that we're trying to sell. And then, when we're trying to craft a script for them and create a video series or a video, we talk to them a lot about who they are and what they're really looking for. And it's kind of like it's obvious things, but it's really easy to get lost, to kind of put them on the back burner as you get excited about an idea and just kind of start to push that idea forward.
Yeah.
So we try to just stay mindful to who they are.
Yeah.
And be true to it.
No, that makes sense. Okay. So thinking about your work experiences, your life experiences, as a non-binary person, how do you kind of take all that in, and do you view any of those lived experiences as like a superpower that allows you to stand out in your business? And if so, like what's maybe one or two that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this, at the last week. My initial thought was, my superpower is invisibility, which is not good. It's because I just have to keep coming out again and again and again to be visible.
Yeah.
Because as a bi person married to a cisgender woman, who I started dating in 2005 and has been married for almost a decade. And then as a non-binary person, I'm constantly just having to keep coming out to be visible. I think it is the idea about being interested in people and being interested in how they're receiving things and what they might be looking for, and just kind of a curiosity that comes from coming out. I think, we look for people that are struggling and look for people that are missing something and want to uplift certain things. So I think it's something around there.
I mean, I think it's awesome what you're saying, because there's, in kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion land, there's this kind of iceberg image, right, that you see, and there's a water line, and the iceberg is kind of like everything that you see on the surface. So like when you first meet someone, you're immediately you're categorizing and making assumptions about what you see. And so much of, I think for a lot of us who are kind of within the rainbow family, so much of our kind of essence, it lives underneath that waterline for us to really share our stories around how we think about our gender or how we think about our sexual orientation, whether it's like attraction, behavior, identity, all that stuff. that takes like real relationship to get to know someone where you trust them enough to be like, actually, when you said that thing, there's a whole lot more to that. And, you're trusting that person enough with sharing. There's like that element to it. Yet at the same time, like what you're saying is just like when people immediately make an assumption about whether it's your sexual orientation or your gender identity, it's like, wait, time out. Like, and then that's kind of, you take an emotional risk every time you do it, but you also want to be fully seen, right? So if you feel safe enough to kind of disrupt that, there is kind of like a purposeful disclosure to it where you kind of immediately can challenge an assumption without even having to kind of like say anything more, right? I definitely experienced that a lot. Like, I think people see me operate in the world, they might assume, that guy's like gay or bi, and they're kind of like lumping me in with cisgender guys. And then there's like, I can kind of like pick up on what's happening, and it depends on the setting. But oftentimes, like in work situations, like I'll do a purposeful disclosure at like a moment where it's like we're talking about assumptions or stereotyping, and then people are, you can kind of see reactions in the room of like, okay, like the effect kind of worked where, we're challenging what's unconscious and becoming more aware of that. So
is that hard for you, or has that gotten easier? Or
oh, I like it. You flipped the microphone here. Yeah, I think it's context, right? Like, and I would love to hear from you about that, like the context of when you feel like you can bring more of yourself to disrupt the assumptions, and when it feels risky, right? When it feels like physically I might not feel safe in this environment doing that. That aside, right? Even kind of like the more access to social, I don't know, like a meeting or something, or trying to be invited back to something, like there is risk to that I think shows up for a lot of us, even in our business settings. I think, like, to your question, does it get easier over time? I think, like, for me, and I'd love to hear from you, once you're starting to say no, and what your business is, it's like, what, like, this person's not going to vibrate with me anyway. So let me just like full stop, like be myself. And I have a hunch they may not continue on this journey, to work with me. And that's okay. There's other people out there for them. You know what I mean? What about for you?
I'm terrified every time. Like,
yeah.
And, even just reminding someone of a pronoun or something like that, like, whether it's a close family member or a stranger, every single time the question is like, did they say he because they forgot, or because that's how they really feel, or because they remember and they're doing it like purposefully, or like, no matter who it is, it's always like 10 different thoughts in my head. Yeah. And then there's that question of like, do I say something? And I hate that question. And that was like the question like before coming out, which was like, like people are having a conversation about trans people online. Do I respond and say that's me in some capacity? Or do I just speak about it generally? And I hated that feeling of like doubt within myself about whether I should say something, It's not even like how someone else is going to react. It's that question of, is it safe for me to be visible in some capacity? Yeah. And for me, that has not gotten easier. I get better at doing it, Yeah. Yeah. But like, and luckily, a lot of the people close to me, all the people close to me are great about it in many ways and make efforts, And I'm kind of like amazed at like my wife is really great at it and is just natural at it. Even my, like, when I remember, it was only fairly recently that inner voice started saying they, them about myself. Yeah. And I literally gasped. Like, I was like, oh, you caught up with me. Like, inner voice, you're on my side, finally. But like, yeah, it's always terrifying. So
yeah, I was writing that down, that being terrified. I'm wondering, and this would be interesting for our audience to think about this too, for folks that are, like thinking about your sexual orientation, you're somewhere within the rainbow family, same with your gender identity, right? So not being cisgender and not being straight, right? But the both and kind of thing. So for you, Ed, I'm just wondering, is it as terrifying to come out as someone who's bisexual, pansexual, talking about your sexual orientation, where there's a little, not always, depending where you are, but there's a little more understanding of like, oh, cool. Like, I'm just imagining in New York, with kind of working in the film industry versus coming out, sharing more about your gender history, your gender identity, and correcting around pronouns. Like, is it just as terrifying? And not that there's a hierarchy or anything. I'm just wondering, because there's more visibility, there's more of an understanding around sexual orientation.
Yeah. I mean, when I came out as bi, it was really scary each time. Yeah. It's gotten easier over the years. And I would say that now that seems super easy. Like, that just seems like, like I'm in New York, like, like it's, it's not a big deal. Having to explain gender and stuff to people just is such a shift of like everything they knew growing up and their experience and what they see before themselves. Like that's been much harder, I'd say. Yeah. And, it usually depends on, you can tell the kind of question, you can tell when someone asks about it, it's really easy to gauge like how scary it's going to be, I guess. Like I'll have people that'll say like, well, what does non-binary mean to you? And I'll be like, oh, okay. Like they get that there are different like experiences of it and stuff. And like, I feel really welcome and like, but then other people, will just be totally lost or super like against it in some capacity, even if they don't really realize it. So yeah, that's just much harder, I think.
Yeah. I love that. I love that subtle distinction. And I hope everyone listening heard that, right? Like, what does this experience mean to you versus what does this experience mean, right? Like, it's there's a word difference, right? But at the same time, it's like really seeing you, Ed, and wanting to get to know you and your own journey versus like a simple Google search, you know what I mean? Where it's like, get some of the basics, right? But, that might be asking a lot of people who, especially in the world that you're in, very transactional, moving kind of a mile a minute. So I think like there's real power in what you are doing and just kind of the conversations that you're allowing to bring up in the film industry around representation. And I think I asked that question just because we are in a moment where we are starting to see more characters just as they are in the world, like whether it's like a family sitcom or a reality show or something where there's someone who's trans or non-binary. And I think that kind of exposure to what's kind of totally our normal existence will help make, hopefully in the future, it easier just to kind of share more of who we are without having to do all of the explaining just to kind of be appreciated and understood for the worldviews that we bring. Just kind of like rounding out the conversation, I'm wondering, thinking about, those folks, whether they're young people thinking about what they want to do in life or people ready to make some kind of transition in their working for someone else and wanting to start their own thing. Like, what kind of advice would you have for those LGBT folks just thinking about taking the first move towards being an entrepreneur? Like, words of wisdom. What would you share to your younger self, I guess?
The biggest thing is something that I was really told like repeatedly as a kid, which was to network. And like, in many ways it had to do with my gender identity, but I was always just like very uncomfortable with how I was seen and felt, I think it was just called shy, like, in general, but it really had more to do with a lot of other things. As I've felt more comfortable with who I am and what I'm doing, it gets easier and easier and more fun to just meet people and connect with them. And that's like the part of the job that I like, like is really just extending that network and growing it and meeting new friends and collaborating and, having the agency to do that. And also not being as afraid to ask for help and be there to help other people. I think people just kind of have to dig in and say who they are, what they want to do, and kind of find those support systems where they can. And people, I think, for the most part, are good to each other. When that happens, we want to see people around us succeed. We want people to be happy with what they're doing and the products that we make. Most workplace disagreements are just because people are afraid that they're not doing a good job, that they don't have enough information, or they don't have enough time or something, to do a job that they're proud of and that they're being seen well. And so I think kind of be clear about who you are and clear about what you need and be there for other people, I guess.
That's great. I mean, just thinking about like that in that one word around networking, it's also the beauty of our communities under the rainbow umbrella, in that there's a spirit of really wanting our businesses to succeed, wanting each of us to succeed. So, if you are thinking about getting started and another non-binary business owner out there, like now Ed's out there, right? Like there's lots of us. So it's just kind of connecting and asking for help, because so many of us want to give back in lots of ways. So keep going, right? And keep seeing that vision, and it's there, right? And I think that your words, Ed, are really helpful for people just wanting to do it. And so there's your motivation, network, start asking questions and reach out, because we're here. So with that, Ed, we're now kind of closing down, and I'm wondering, last thing, like, where's the one best place that you would love people to kind of go to kind of check out what you're up to in business and in life in general?
I mean, I guess the website punchcardfilms.com is the best place to go. And that's where we'll keep updating our content. And then edhellman.com has like all my personal projects that might be outside of that also. But for the most part, I'd say Punchcard Films is where my energy lies and where my heart is right now. And all the good stuff is going to be there.
Sweet. Yeah, it's a great website. So we'll have that in the show notes. And Ed, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure getting to know you a little bit better. And for everybody who tuned in, thank you so much. It's always a privilege connecting with you and so many inspiring outbosses like Ed. So know that details from today's conversation are up on the website at outentrepreneur.com. And remember, we keep bringing you new episodes every Tuesday morning. So keep listening, keep downloading, and keep sharing with folks that this show might help. And for now, keep showing up as authentically as you want at work and in life. And we'll see you again next Tuesday. Take care.